Hey guys, John T. Hickman here. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to answer a question that comes up all the time when people start learning about emotional allowing, mindfulness, nervous system regulation, TMS, and chronic symptom recovery. The question is, do I need to allow emotions all day long to heal my chronic symptoms? A lot of people discover emotional allowing and it feels like an approach that finally makes sense. They've often tried lots of different things already, different treatments, different exercises, different diets, different explanations. Then they come across this idea that emotion, stress, pressure, and the nervous system may be playing a much bigger role than they initially realized. You may not even have experienced significant symptom relief yet, but perhaps you've started experimenting with allowing during meditation, journaling, therapy, or self-reflection. Maybe you've already started noticing just how much time you've spent trying to get away from difficult emotions, difficult sensations, fear, uncertainty, restlessness, frustration, or discomfort. And perhaps you've started seeing that there may be something valuable about learning how to make space for those experiences rather than constantly fighting them. But then another problem often appears. People start monitoring themselves all day. They start checking how they feel every 5 minutes. They start wondering whether they're suppressing emotions. They start worrying they're not allowing enough. And without even realizing it, healing becomes another full-time job. If that's happening to you, I want to reassure you that you're not doing anything wrong. In fact, it's one of the most common misunderstandings I see when people learn about allowing. As always, I'll be exploring this topic by answering some of the most common questions people ask around emotional allowing, symptom recovery, and healing. So let's start with the first question. The first question is, why do people become obsessed with allowing emotions? Quite simple. I think the first thing to understand is that people usually become obsessed with allowing because allowing feels important. When you've spent years struggling with symptoms and nothing seems to fully explain what's happening, finding an approach that finally makes sense can be a huge relief. Even before symptoms improve, people often feel like they've discovered a missing piece of the puzzle with allowing. The problem is that the mind quickly turns that discovery into a project. It starts thinking that if allowing is helpful, then more allowing must be even better. If 10 minutes helps, then surely an hour would help more. If emotional honesty is useful, then maybe I should be emotionally processing every moment of every day. What makes this even more difficult is that many people dealing with chronic symptoms already have perfectionistic tendencies. They care deeply. They want to get things right. They work hard. They take responsibility. So the same mindset that may have contributed to the symptoms can end up attaching itself to healing as well. Without realizing it, the goal stops being emotional safety and starts becoming emotional perfection. Instead of allowing emotions, people start managing emotions. Instead of trusting the process, they start constantly checking whether they're doing the process correctly. That's usually the point where healing starts becoming exhausting. Part of this work is learning how those perfectionistic tendencies show up inside our minds. Sometimes they show up as pressure, sometimes they'll show up as fear, sometimes they'll show up as urgency, sometimes they show up as the belief that you're running out of time or that you need to heal faster than you're currently healing. What many people eventually realize is that healing is not just about learning how to allow emotions, it's about learning how to put some of those perfectionistic tendencies aside. It's about learning how to create space for emotional work and then also create space for living your life. It's about learning how to trust that you don't need to be emotionally processing every minute of every day in order to recover. Over time, and allowing does naturally bleed into your everyday life. You may become less reactive, less avoidant, and more emotionally available in ordinary moments. But that's very different from spending the whole day monitoring yourself. The goal is not to become obsessed with allowing. The goal is to gradually become someone who feels safe enough to allow during dedicated moments. That's question number one. Question number two, do I need to allow emotions every minute of every day? You know the answer already? No. And honestly, I think this answer surprises a lot of people because once they learn about emotional suppression and emotional avoidance, they become worried that any moment spent not feeling emotions must mean they're doing something wrong. But emotional allowing was never meant to become a full-time occupation. The goal is not to spend your entire day scanning your body, checking your emotions, analyzing your thoughts, and wondering whether you're suppressing something. That's not emotional freedom. That's just it's another form of hypervigilance. Think about it this way. If you had a close friend who wanted your attention every second of every day, eventually that relationship would become exhausting. Emotions are not asking for constant attention. They're asking for willingness. They're asking for openness. They're asking for moments where they can be acknowledged without immediately being pushed away. And you can have a very normal day not processing and heal. You can work, exercise, spend time with your friends, enjoy yourself, watch a film, cook dinner, go on holiday and live your life. Then you can create dedicated spaces where deeper emotional work can happen. I'll speak about that a lot in this video. When I talk about emotional allowing, I'm talking about meditation. I'm talking about journaling. I'm talking about therapy. I'm talking about a mindfulness practice. I'm talking about creating intentional moments where you allow yourself to feel what's there without needing to change it. Then after the meditation, after the therapy, you can get on with your day. You don't need to carry the practice around with you every waking moment. You don't need to constantly check whether you're allowing enough. You simply return to those dedicated spaces, the meditations, over and over again every single day. And that's the part that people often underestimate. Time matters. You need more time in this process. You won't get immediate relief straight away. It's not about getting relief straight away. It's more about giving your nervous system enough time to learn. You're building emotional capacity. You're building emotional strength. You're learning how to stay present with emotions that may not have been consciously felt for years or even decades. Like building strength in a gym, that process can take time. Question number 3, what's the difference between what everyday life requires and what the nervous system requires? Very important topic. This distinction is one of the most important ideas in the entire healing process because everyday life and the nervous system are often operating according to completely different priorities. Once people understand this, so much confusion starts to disappear. Everyday life requires us to be responsible. It requires us to be kind, thoughtful, respectful, and capable of functioning in relationships and society. If someone annoys you at work, everyday life does not require you to shout at them. If a family member triggers you, everyday life does not require you to unleash every anger thought in your head. You learn to be kind and civil. The nervous system, on the other hand, has a different concern. The nervous system is not asking whether an emotion is socially acceptable. It's asking whether an emotion is safe. It doesn't care whether the emotion is anger, sadness, fear, grief, rage, despair, disappointment, or terror. It simply wants to know whether that emotional state can exist without becoming a threat. This is why someone can be completely functional on the outside while still needing to create space for emotions on the inside. The goal isn't to become impulsive. The goal isn't to act on every feeling. The goal is to help the nervous system learn that emotions themselves are not dangerous. And in practical terms, this means spending some of your day behaving like a normal human being. It means going to work, speaking respectfully to people, looking after responsibilities, expressing boundaries where appropriate, and continuing to engage with life. You don't need to turn every emotional experience into a dramatic expression. And then, during your dedicated practice every day, you give the nervous system something different. During meditation, journaling, therapy, or self-reflection, you allow the full spectrum of emotion, not just mild frustration or sadness, rage, terror, grief, despair, hopelessness, fear, whatever happens to be there, numbness, nothingness can be there. You might spend 20 minutes sitting with intense emotional experiences or nothing, and then immediately go and make dinner, answer emails, or take the dog for a walk. Both things can coexist. You don't have to spend the entire day feeling those emotions for the nervous system to learn that they're safe. And again, this is where time becomes so important. You're not trying to force a breakthrough every day. You're slowly teaching the nervous system, this side, that emotions are survivable. That process often unfolds much more gradually than people expect. That's question number 3. Question number 4, if I don't express anger, am I suppressing it? This is one of the biggest misunderstandings I see. People hear the phrase allow your emotions and assume it means they need to express every emotion they feel. But allowing and acting are not the same thing. In fact, confusing those two things creates a huge amount of unnecessary fear. You can fully allow anger without shouting at someone. You can fully allow sadness without collapsing into it. You can fully allow fear without obeying it. Emotional allowing is an internal process. It's about creating space for an experience rather than automatically reacting to it. Many people find this strange at first because they're so used to thinking in extremes. Either I suppress the emotion or I express the emotion. Either I push it down or I act it out. But there is another option, which is simply allowing it to exist without agreeing with it. For many people, this happens most naturally during meditation, journaling, therapy, or a mindfulness practice. You can create a safe container where emotions are welcome. You allow anger to be there in the body. You allow fear to be there in the body. You allow sadness to be there. You allow whatever is present without needing to turn it into an action or agreeing with it. Then the practice ends and you return to your day. You don't need to carry the emotion around. You don't need to keep digging for more. You simply trust that you've given your nervous system an opportunity to learn something important. Over time, people start realizing that emotional honesty and emotional maturity can coexist. I can feel intense emotions internally in a meditation while still behaving responsibly externally. I can allow emotions without acting them out. In many ways, that's what emotional regulation, availability, and intelligence actually looks like. Question 5. Why do symptoms often seem connected to our emotions? Very real possibility is that symptoms are not just random interruptions in the body, they may actually be part of the homecoming. I know that can sound strange, especially when you're in pain or when you're dealing with symptoms that feel frightening, frustrating, or completely unfair. But in this work, one of the ideas we explore is that the mind and body may be creating symptoms because they are trying to bring you back to the body. For a lot of people, emotions have been dealt with almost entirely from the mind. You try to reframe the emotions, soothe them, talk yourself out of them, analyze them, distract from them, ignore them, or act differently on top of them. And often, all of that makes sense. You learned those strategies because they helped you get through life. But over time, the emotions themselves may never have been fully felt in the body, only solved in the mind. So when symptoms appear in the body, it can feel like the body is betraying you. But another way to understand it is that symptoms may be pulling your attention back towards the very place you spent leaving. They may be saying, come back to the body, come back to what is actually being felt, come back to the emotional experience rather than trying to solve everything from the mind. Let's say anger has not felt safe for a long time. Maybe you learned to be civil, calm, understanding, reasonable, and good. Maybe anger felt dangerous. Maybe anger created conflict in your life. Maybe anger threatened relationships. So your system learns that anger towards certain people, situations, or parts of your life is not allowed. Then the mind and body may create symptoms that trigger that exact emotion somewhere else. So instead of feeling anger towards a colleague, a partner, a parent, or a situation, you now feel anger towards your stomach, your pain, your back pain, your fatigue, your migraine, or your symptoms. It may sound far-fetched when you're in it because it feels like a chicken and egg situation. Did the symptom create the emotion, or did the emotion create the symptom? But as people go through this work, they often look back and realize that the symptoms were creating a doorway into emotional states they had not been allowing themselves to feel directly. The anger towards the symptom may not be accidental. The fear towards the symptom may not be accidental. The frustration, helplessness, despair, and uncertainty around symptoms may all be part of the emotional material asking to be met in the body. This is why we start moving from the mind into the body in this process. Instead of asking or trying to solve anger by thinking about it, you notice where anger is present. Maybe it's in the stomach, maybe it's in the chest, maybe it's in the breath, maybe it's in thoughts, maybe it's simply in the attitude towards a symptom. And rather than trying to fix it, you begin to acknowledge it and allow it to be there in the body. You might notice stomach pain and realize that there's anger towards the stomach pain. Instead of arguing with the anger or trying to make it go away, you let yourself feel anger. You make space for it. Then maybe fear appears, so you let fear be there too. Then maybe frustration appears. Then maybe nothing happens. The practice is not about controlling what comes next. It's about staying with what's here. This is really important for people who are going into their mindfulness practice and experiencing numbness, boredom, or nothingness. Many people assume that if they are not feeling some huge emotional wave, they are doing the practice wrong. They think there needs to be rage or terror or grief or some big dramatic release in order to heal. But that's not always how this process looks. Sometimes the practice is boring. Often it's boring. Often it feels numb. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening at all. But then you notice your relationship to that nothingness. Are you afraid that nothing is happening? Are you angry at the numbness? Are you frustrated with the boredom? Are you worried that unless you feel something big, you won't get better? If so, there's already something to be with. You may not be feeling a huge emotion inside the body, but you may be feeling fear towards the fact that nothing is happening. You may be feeling anger towards the numbness. You may be feeling frustration towards the boredom, and that becomes the doorway into feeling. You don't need to manufacture an emotional experience. You simply notice what's already present in your relationship to this moment, in your mindfulness. A central teaching in mindfulness is that identification creates suffering. We suffer what we become fused with. So if boredom is here and a part of you hates boredom, that is something to notice. If numbness is here and a part of you is terrified that numbness means you're doing it wrong, that fear is something to meet. That's the practice. So how do you actually allow anger, fear, boredom, numbness, or uncertainty? In many ways, it is simpler than the mind wants it to be. You pay attention to the fact that it's here. You notice whether it appears as thoughts, sensations in the breath, pressure, tightness, heat, restlessness, heaviness, or even the absence of sensation. Then you stay with that state of being and notice what arises next. The difficult part of this is that the mind wants proof. It wants immediate evidence that the practice is working. It wants to acknowledge anger and then feel relief. It wants to allow fear in the body and then feel calm. It wants to do the technique and get a result. But this process does not always give proof in the same way other approaches might. Sometimes you acknowledge anger and nothing will happen. Sometimes it may intensify. Sometimes it stays the same. Sometimes it will soften. Sometimes it disappears after a few seconds and your attention moves to something else. None of those outcomes mean you have done it wrong. The practice is not to control what happens after allowing. The practice is to stop needing to control it. Allow the next thing. In many ways, this whole process is about learning how to be with experience while letting go of control. I'm going to acknowledge what's here. I'm going to allow what's here. And I'm going to let go of needing to determine what happens next. That might mean sitting with uncertainty, doubt, boredom, anger, fear, or confusion without needing to immediately resolve it. So if doubt is here, you can spend 10 minutes allowing doubt. If boredom is here, you can spend 10 minutes allowing boredom. If uncertainty is here, you can spend 10 minutes allowing uncertainty. If parts of you want to change the experience, those parts are welcome too. The point is not to create the perfect emotional state. The point is to become more welcoming towards whatever state is actually here. If all of this sounds complex, that is exactly why support matters. That is why community, mentorship, therapy, guidance, and repeated practice can be so valuable. Eventually, through experience and support, the process starts to make sense. You begin to understand what you're actually practicing every day. You're not trying to force healing. You're learning how to come home to yourself daily. That's question number 5. Question number 6, why can healing create an identity crisis? It often does. Because many of us built our identity around coping. We became the strong person, the good person, the calm person, responsible person, the person who never complains, or the person who always has everything under control. Those identities often help us survive difficult situations, but they may also have limited what we allowed ourselves to feel. Then healing begins and emotions start appearing that don't fit our identity. Suddenly there's anger where there wasn't supposed to be anger, fear where there wasn't supposed to be fear, sadness where there wasn't supposed to be sadness, and naturally, people start questioning who they are. Many people become worried that something has gone wrong. They think they're becoming worse, more emotional, less resilient, or less stable, but often the opposite is happening. What's actually occurring is that previously rejected parts of themselves are finally being welcomed back into their awareness. This is what people mean when they say healing can be messy. It's not neat. You may not always know how to land. You may suddenly feel unsure how to relate to people in your life, how to express needs, how to set boundaries, or how to be in the world when you're no longer abandoning yourself in the same old ways that you were. For some people, this is wildly uncomfortable. They don't know who they are without the old coping strategies. They don't know how to be someone who has needs, anger, sadness, limits, preferences, or boundaries. It can feel like the old identity is loosening before the new one has fully formed. For other people, this same process can feel incredibly empowering. They start recognizing their needs for the first time. They start expressing boundaries. They stop saying yes when they mean no. They stop organizing their entire life around keeping everybody else comfortable. And even though that can feel uncomfortable, it can also feel like a huge relief. Some people may not experience this identity crisis at all. So if you're listening to this and it doesn't apply to you, that's completely fine. This is not a required stage of healing. It's simply something that comes up often enough that it's worth naming, because when it does happen, people can become frightened by this. The solution is not to panic and assume you've lost yourself. The solution is to understand that you may be recalibrating. You may be learning how to live with more honesty, more emotional availability, and more connection to your actual needs. Over time, you usually find your ground again. And again, this is where support can be incredibly helpful. When you're in the middle of an identity shift, it can be difficult to know whether you're moving in a healthy direction or just falling apart. Having guidance, community, or mentorship can help you recognize that this discomfort may be part of the process rather than evidence that something has gone wrong. Healing is not always about becoming something or someone completely new. Sometimes it's about becoming more complete. It's about making room for parts of yourself that were never given permission to exist. That process can feel uncomfortable, but with time, support, and continued practice, people usually find a steadier and more honest version of themselves. Question number 7. Why does healing sometimes feel worse before it feels better? I've answered this question in lots of different ways on lots of different videos. It's another question that comes up constantly. People often start doing emotional work and then experience periods where symptoms flare, emotions intensify, and fear starts increasing again. When that happens, the mind usually jumps to the worst possible conclusion. People start thinking they've done something wrong. They think they've broken themselves. They think they were better before they started this work. They assume the increase in discomfort must mean they're moving in the wrong direction. That's an understandable reaction, but it's not always an accurate one. Sometimes a deeper emotional layer is emerging. Sometimes something that hasn't been consciously felt for years is finally becoming available. Sometimes the nervous system is starting to relax enough that experience it previously kept hidden can begin to surface. That doesn't necessarily mean something has gone wrong. What I've come to realize is that setbacks are not a hindrance to the process. They're actually a necessary part of the process, because what the mind often wants is a one and done experience. It wants to feel fear once, process fear once, and then never have to feel fear again. It wants to release anger once and then be permanently done with the anger. But emotional availability doesn't work like that. The nervous system wants access to the full spectrum of emotion throughout your life, not because it's trying to make you suffer, but because emotions are a natural part of being human. Fear will come back, anger will come back, sadness will come back, grief will come back. Long after symptoms have improved, those emotions will still be a part of your life. You might have a wonderful day 6 months on from now when you feel better. Everything might be going well. Then you sit down for your evening meditation and suddenly there's grief or anger or disappointment or fear. Nothing has gone wrong. Your system simply wants to experience those emotions in that moment. This is why setbacks can be such an important teacher. They remind us that emotional availability is not a one-off achievement. It's a lifelong relationship. We're learning how to welcome emotions whenever they arise, not just when symptoms are present. Many people become frightened when symptoms flare or emotions intensify because parts of them immediately start telling stories. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe I'm going backwards. Maybe I've made things worse. Maybe I've opened up something I shouldn't have opened. Those parts can sound incredibly convincing. The problem comes when we become identified with those stories. We start trying to solve them with the mind. We argue with them. We reassure ourselves. We try to convince ourselves that everything is okay, very well-meaning things. Sometimes there's a place for reassurance, but often the deeper invitation is something else. Often there is fear here when there's a setback. Often there's uncertainty. Often there could be frustration, disappointment, hopelessness. And rather than needing to solve those emotions, you simply need to be available to those emotions. This is one of the reasons community and mentorship become so valuable. When you're in the middle of a setback, it can be very difficult to see clearly. Everything feels convincing. The symptoms feel convincing. The fear feels convincing. The stories feel convincing. Having someone remind you that setbacks are a normal part of the process can help you stay grounded. So if healing sometimes feels worse before it feels better, it doesn't automatically mean you've gone backwards. Sometimes it simply means that your system is showing you another opportunity to practice emotional availability, another opportunity to welcome emotions rather than fight them, another opportunity to remember that emotions are not problems to solve. Question number 8. What does it mean to allow the emotion but not believe the story? This distinction changed everything for me. It's something you learn in mindfulness, because emotions often arrive carrying stories. Fear doesn't just show up as a sensation. Fear usually shows up with predictions, warnings, catastrophizing, and worst-case scenarios. It tells you what it thinks is happening and what it thinks will happen next. The problem is that most of us have spent our lives assuming that if an emotion feels real, then the story attached to it must also be real. If fear says you're going backwards, then you must be going backwards. If fear says you're never going to recover, then maybe you're never going to recover. Emotional allowing teaches us something different. It teaches us that we can welcome the emotion without automatically believing the narrative, attaching ourselves to it. We can feel fear without accepting fear's conclusions. We can feel sadness without assuming sadness knows the future. This can create a huge amount of freedom. We stop fighting emotions, but we also stop letting emotions dictate reality. We learn how to make space for the experience while remaining grounded in something bigger than whatever the story happens to be passing through the mind. In practical terms, this is one of the things we're practicing every time we meditate, journal, sit quietly, or do some sort of emotional work. We notice the emotion, we acknowledge the emotion, we allow the emotion in the body, but we don't immediately hand over control to whatever story happens to be attached to the emotion. It's also important to understand that allowing an emotion does not mean the emotion disappears immediately. This is another expectation people often bring into the process. They think if they allow fear properly, the fear should vanish. If they allow sadness properly, the sadness should dissolve. But emotions don't always work like that. Sometimes disappointment needs a few days to be with you. Sometimes grief needs a week. Sometimes fear revisits us repeatedly for a period of time. Sometimes emotions move quickly. Sometimes they move slowly. Sometimes they seem to disappear and then return again later. The practice is not about controlling how long an emotion stays. The practice is about becoming available to it while it's here. This is one of the reasons I value community so much. When people share what's happening in their lives, they start realizing that emotional processing doesn't always happen in a straight line. Sometimes there are ups and downs in life. There will be ups and downs in life. Sometimes there are periods of uncertainty. Sometimes emotions need more time than we expected. Allowing the emotion, but not believing the story, doesn't mean we instantly feel better. It means we stop arguing with reality quite so much. We stop demanding that emotions leave on our schedule. And in doing so, we create far more space for genuine healing. That's question number 8. Question number 9, do I need to make the perfect decision to heal? A lot of people become trapped in decision making during recovery. They spend hours trying to figure out whether they should rest or push through, whether they should stay somewhere or leave somewhere, whether they should go to the gym or stay home, whether they should change jobs or stay where they are. Underneath all of those questions is usually a deeper fear. What if I get this wrong? What if this decision slows down my recovery? What if I make a mistake and regret it later? It's easy to become convinced that healing depends on choosing the perfect route every single time. Of course, part of this process is learning to recognize our needs more clearly. We become more aware of where we're people-pleasing. We become more aware of where we're abandoning ourselves. We become more aware of where we're saying yes and where we really mean no. And naturally, we often start making decisions that are more aligned with who we are. That can absolutely have a positive impact on the nervous system. Learning to honor your needs, express boundaries, and live more authentically often reduces a huge amount of internal pressure. But even when you're doing all of that, you're still going to make mistakes. You're still going to choose things that don't work out. You're still going to experience regret. You're still going to disappoint yourself occasionally, maybe very often. You're still going to get things wrong. And that's okay. Because being human means making mistakes. It means experiencing regret, disappointment, uncertainty, embarrassment, and sadness. Healing is not about creating a life where those emotions never happen. Healing is about becoming capable of experiencing them when they do show up. The deeper question isn't whether you'll always make the right decision. The deeper question is whether you'll be willing to feel whatever emotions arise afterwards. If regret appears, can you welcome regret? If disappointment appears, can you welcome disappointment? If fear appears, can you welcome fear? Then once you've done that, you simply learn from the experience and do your best with the next decision that you make. That's all any of us can really do. Question 10, last question. So what should I actually do? At this point, I've probably answered this question throughout the video, but I think it's worth bringing everything together because people often want something practical they can take away from the conversation, from the video, so it doesn't feel complex. What we are really trying to do is create regular spaces where emotional honesty is possible. The goal is to give the nervous system opportunities to experience emotions safely. Not occasionally, not once, but consistently over time. It's important to remember that everyday life doesn't always provide the ideal environment for emotional processing. Sometimes you're at work, sometimes you're with family, sometimes you're dealing with the kids, you're dealing with other responsibilities, sometimes you simply need to get through the day. In those moments, it may not be so appropriate to stop everything and fully immerse yourself in whatever emotion is present. And that's completely okay. Everyday life expectations. You can acknowledge that something is there and trust you'll return to it later in your meditation or your journaling. Then, during your meditation, journaling, therapy, mindfulness practice, or whatever emotional tool you're using, you create space for the emotions. You sit down and say, okay, now I'm available. Now I'm willing to notice what's here. Now I'm willing to stop fixing, analyzing, distracting, playing a role for everyone and solving. Sometimes that practice will feel beautiful. Sometimes it will feel uncomfortable. It will often feel uncomfortable. Sometimes it will feel boring. Sometimes the practice will feel frustrating, particularly at the beginning. Sometimes it will feel like absolutely nothing is happening in your mindfulness. I actually got to the point in my own practice when I was going through this where I started celebrating uncomfortable meditations because I realized that no other part of my life would I give permission to these emotions to exist. If I felt restless in meditation, great. Angry during journaling, great. If I felt uncertainty, confusion, boredom, or frustration, great. Those experiences were finally being welcomed rather than pushed away. Over time, something interesting started to happen. I found myself becoming more emotionally available outside of those dedicated practices. I wasn't trying so hard to get rid of emotions. I wasn't trying so hard to fix myself. I wasn't trying so hard to control every internal experience. But that took time. And importantly, it wasn't necessary for symptom recovery. You can do dedicated spaces. And I didn't need to spend my whole day allowing emotions, and nor do you. I didn't need to become emotionally available 24 hours a day. I simply needed to dedicate consistent time to practices that helped my nervous system learn that emotions were safe. Then the rest of the day, I got on with my life, whatever that looks like. I got on with work, I exercised, I spent time with people, I isolated myself if I was going through a lot. I tried my best to laugh. I traveled if I could, if pain wasn't debilitating enough. I lived. And that combination turned out to be incredibly important for me. Dedicated spaces for emotional honesty and dedicated spaces for living life. Both matter. Both are a part of the healing. Getting on with your life, learning how to allow emotions. Both belong in the recovery process. Let's bring this all together. So, in conclusion, you do not need to allow emotions all day long. You do not need to monitor yourself constantly. You do not need to become obsessed with healing. You probably will do, but hopefully this video has helped you not. You do not need to process emotions every minute of every day. And you certainly do not need to get everything right. What you do need is consistency. You need patience. You need repeated experiences that teach your nervous system that emotions are safe. You need compassion for yourself when things feel difficult. And you need the willingness to keep showing up, even when progress feels slower than you'd like, even when there's a setback. Healing takes time because nervous systems learn through repetition rather than force. Nervous systems learn through safety rather than pressure. Small moments of emotional honesty, repeated over weeks and months, often create far bigger changes than dramatic breakthroughs ever do. And finally, remember that support helps. Human beings have always learned difficult things in community. Teachers help, mentors help, friends help, groups help. You do not have to carry all of this by yourself. So if you've been putting pressure on yourself to allow more, heal faster, or do this perfectly, maybe this video can be a reminder that recovery doesn't need to be another thing you perform. It can simply be a process of gradually teaching your nervous system that emotions are safe to feel. Thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. As always, if you have any questions, please ask below the video. I'm aware that during the video the sun went down and it all got a bit blurry, and while I was talking I got frustrated that the quality of the video went down, but there's my perfectionistic tendencies. I hope you didn't come out of the video because the quality got bad. Like I said, if you have any questions, please ask below the video. Anything that you'd like to share about your experience, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to reflect on what you're going through and possibly help you. If you'd like to join our community, the link for it is in the caption. If you're watching this in our community and you have some questions or shares, as always, please ask below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Hopefully hear from you soon.